Okay, I think we can start.
So maybe we should start. Yes, we should start without delay. And so welcome to whoever is connected now to this second iCog talk today. Second, but first in my heart for many reasons. It's a talk by two persons which who I know quite well. The first is Pietro Morasso, who is one of my teacher since 50 years, and is still teaching me a lot of things. So it's very close to my heart to be here to present him, to talk about body schema, along with Vishu Mohan. Vishwanathan is the full name. Vishu was a former PhD student with us. In fact, he was the first uptake of PhDs at IIT already many years ago. Now he's an established and I hear some noise. Maybe people who are not talking could cut off the mic. Thank you very much. So I was presenting Vishu Mohan, who is now a tenured professor at the University of Essex, at the professor in robotics there. And he has been working with Pietro and Francesco Rea and other on in architecture for the iCog already many years ago, and now he's working on application related to robotic harvesting. He has many interests, and he has been one of the most brilliant PhD student we had. So it's a pleasure to introduce today's talk, which is going to be about the body schema, neural simulation for covert and overt actions of embodied cognitive agents. So I leave the floor to Pietro.
Thank you very much, Giulio. Let me start this talk by attracting your attention to the little image on the bottom of the slide. I believe you can see it. Is the iCog representation. I believe that the main motivation behind the iCog initiative, and this is the second talk about that, is that in spite of the beautiful and constantly improving bodyware of iCab, the associated cognyware is still, let's say, limited. I also believe that most of us do not buy the hype of artificial intelligence as the magic solution for achieving cognitive robots. Thirdly, I also believe that the iCab cognyware must be somehow anthropo-inspired, not in the sense of a superficial social acceptance, but because humans and robots may be partners in a variety of situations, only if they share basic cognitive structure, like a body schema and a set of neural instruments, like a neural simulation of overt and covert action. By the way, you may have noticed that the title of the talk is the same of a short paper in press that summarizes most of the ideas that will be presented in this talk, together with a more expanded paper that includes commentaries by Neville Logan, by David Vernon, Freeston, and other persons. Okay, so cognitive robotic architecture. This is the goal. Vishu and myself have worked quite a lot to build some building blocks for this idea. Which are the needs for having something like that? From the robot point of view, is a long list, but just to give you an idea, one is that that it is necessary for the robot to have a feasibility check of its own action before doing them, understanding the consequence of its own actions, and devising an action, for example, for hypothesis testing. What if? And from in a dual manner, understanding the action of a partner, guessing the intention of the partner, imitating him or her, and interpreting a supervising partner feedback. And what about the human? Is just the same. The same set of needs are required for any kind of real partnership between robots, between humans, and between robot and human. And what about the alternatives? Well, this is that means that we have to ask to answer to this kind of question. Cognition is better described in terms of computation and representation, or agent environment dynamics. This is one of many questions, but this is quite important, I believe. So from this point of view, I think that it is possible to identify two large classes of cognitive architectures, one that can be called implicit cognition, and is well represented, for example, by Valentino Breitenberg many years ago with his intelligent vehicles, and Rodney Brooks' idea about developing intelligence without representation, and more recently by Anthony Chemero, who is a philosopher and is arguing that agent environment dynamics is all what you need without any kind of computation architecture. I believe that this kind of approach will generate reactive architectures characterized by an equivalence between cognition and control, and a common real-time axis where everything happens. Another alternative that can be generally labeled as a set of architectures based on embodied cognition is and will generate prospective architecture, architecture capable to have prospective capabilities. Of course, Norbert Wiener with cybernetics is the starting father with his idea about communication and control in machine and in humans. Maren and Poggio went further with a very interesting short paper about the effect that generalized information processing systems can characterize, for example, robots and things like that. And I will also make a relation with Jean Ayrault for his idea about the neural simulation of actions that are important for allowing to integrate but separate cognition from control. And the effect that in this framework there is a real-time axis which is important for control, whereas cognition happens at the same time behind and beyond real time. Okay. Of course, Vishu and myself voted for this second class of architecture, and we are still trying to add some building blocks to this idea. One important, so we shall try to give some idea about a perspective architecture for human-robot partnership based on the body cognition and neural simulation of overt and covert action. The basic idea is the equivalence of overt and covert actions, that is real and imagined actions, where two faces of the same coins, but equally important. And there are two important aspects that can be figured out. One can be considered as a functional topological aspect related to the fact that action generation, observation, imagination, and understanding share similar functional networks in the brain, distributed multi-center neural activities are the consequence of this processing. And there is quite a lot of experimental evidence supporting this idea that Jean-Hérol was one of the main investigators. The other is that also the temporal aspects demonstrate that there is an equivalence between overt and covert actions. For example, it has been demonstrated that in both cases, Fitts law is satisfied, and also the two-thirds power law that characterized complex 2 or 3 dimensional trajectories is characterized real and imagined actions. From the robotic, let's say, point of view, that is a computational idea, how to translate general ideas into a computational architecture for a robot, is how to formulate and implement a model for a neural simulation of action that satisfies 2 main criteria, a criteria of biological plausibility and at the same time robotic feasibility in order to be practical. And our solution that will be explained by Vishu and by myself is that this computational implementation is based on the animation of a somatotopically organized body schema by means of PMP or passive motion paradigm, something that probably some of you don't know what it is about, and I will spend some slides to explain better. It's an idea which comes from the 80s, very old, and with Vishu was resurrected and translated from neuroscience to robotic. But before that, let me spend some slide for giving a historical background about multi-joint motor control, both in humans and the robot. Until the 70s, motor control was focused on single joint motor control with a kind of reductionist framework, and somehow ignoring the holistic view implied by the famous degrees of freedom problem formulated by Bernstein, or the motor equivalence principle formulated by Lashley, that remained there but didn't really push experimental and theoretical activities. And here I wanted to give you what changed the framework. That is the fact that in the 80s there was the discovery of the spatio-temporal invariance of 2D and 3D movements. For example, reaching movement, writing, handwriting, or scribbling in 2 dimensions, reaching or scribbling in 3 dimensions. For example, in the first case, here we are in 1981, was the discovery that reaching movements are all characterized by a bell-shaped speed profile and a basic isochrony independent of position of the movement, distance from the target, and things like that. At the same time, looking at handwriting or 2D scribbles, for example, it was discovered that the speed and the curvature profile are anti-correlated. If on one profile there is a maximum, in the other there is a minimum, and vice versa. And as regards the 3D scribbles, it was discovered that these 3-dimensional trajectories are organized as a conjunction of piecewise planar primitives. The problem is, where do these spatio-temporal invariants come from and how to explain them? Well, basically there are different proposals which have been came out in the second part of the 80s. The first one, for example, was the two-thirds power law by Laquaniti and co-workers, that proposes that between curvature and speed profile, there is a specific function or power function that describes it. The minimum jerk model by Flesch and Hogan that proposed that, for example, the speed profile is what it is because it minimizes the derivative of acceleration, that is jerk, or the Witt model by Balloch and Grossberg, that is a vector integration to endpoint. Then there is the PMP model, passive motion paradigm, which is our solution, let's say, and more recently the active inference model proposed by Freestone. Well, basically, Freestone, we had a discussion with him, and he agreed that actually passive motion and active inference are two ways to describe a same approach to motor control. And we shall try to demonstrate that PMP, which is more or less equivalent to active inference, explains in a more compact way all the free model here, and is immediately applicable to a robot, whereas the other free cannot be real. Okay, let me now show more or less in some detail what the PMP is, and the associated network that will characterize the underlying body schema. The kinematic network of a kinematic chain, like the arm, is a directed graph that represents a generalized space-force relationship at the same time in multiple spaces: task space, joint space, muscle space, and can be also extended to tool space. In other terms, this is a multi-referential representation, so not only a single reference characterization, but a multi-referential representation of a body or a body schema. The arrows, we are considering highly redundant system, like the whole body of a human. The arrows identify well-posed transformation between subspaces, whatever the degree of redundancy. These, for example, JS, JM, are basically Jacobian matrices, and K and C are elastic matrices that corresponds to the transformation from generalized movement to generalized forces. And PMP is the passive motion paradigm, is the animation of a kinematic network. The kinematic network is a network representation of a body schema, and the PMP is its animation. This is the basic idea. By the way, the name itself, passive motion paradigm, was invented by Sandro Musevaldi in 1988, so a long time ago. Okay, some development which came later on. For example, with Vishu, we could show that both the Jacobian matrices and its transpose that have a dual function for transforming generalized movement and transforming generalized forces. These Jacobian matrices can be used in one sense and also in the other sense. And so is a very simple and paradigmatic way of building the structure of a kinematic network. How is the animation performed? Well, basically, the idea is that the animation of this kind of body schema is carried out by the attractor dynamics of this representation of the body, initiated by the injection of a force field with a nonlinear modulation, highly nonlinear modulation. Suppose that you start from an initial equilibrium, so the network is quiet, and the different task spaces represent the posture of the human or the robot. When you want to perform an action, in this case, the intention to act is implemented by a force field that attracts the end effector to the target. And once you instantiate this force field is propagated through the network following the arrows, that is the well-posed transformation, going from the task space to the joint space, from the generalized force to the generalized movement, and then to the representation and then this generates a multi-referential synergy. That is, the output of the animation is the representation of a movement in all the free spaces. With robots, of course, there are no muscles, there are actuators, so it's simplified in a sense. And here you can understand where the name passive is coming from. That is, from this point of view, the body schema is like the puppet, and the puppeteer injects forces in order to generate synergies. And this idea of highly nonlinear modulation is an idea that was introduced in this framework years later. Is similar to the Go command of a VIT model, but is more general and comes from what has been developed in the field of addressable memories by Michael Zack, and it is called terminal attractor. That is the effect that the attractor dynamics that usually with a constant command is something which goes to equilibrium in an exponential manner, is forced to equilibrium by means of this highly nonlinear command, which does not have the role of a metronome, but is an activation signal which has the purpose of setting a hard deadline. You must end at that time, and it is forced to reach that final state by this highly nonlinear gamma command. And this is more or less the explanation. For example, in this case, a simple reaching movement, the force is initially proportional to the distance. If it is an elastic force, for example, is proportional to the initial distance. Then you activate with a gamma command that you can see initially is basically 0. The idea was to terminate after 1 second, for example, and the gamma command is something which exponentially go to infinity and forces the equilibrium, the final equilibrium to be reached. And what is interesting is that this kind of terminal attractor dynamics gives you as a consequence the bell-shaped velocity profile and the minimum jerk properties of the same idea. And it is also interesting to say that the same mechanism can generate straight reaching movement, and if you put some curly component in the force field, so a force field that is not only going to the target but has a kind of a curly component, the same mechanism gives you curved trajectories on one side or the other side. Okay, so the bell-shaped speed profile and the straight or curved reaching movement are a consequence of this PMP model. And the same model can be also be used for combination of primitive reaching or primitive strokes for generating, for example, handwriting like trajectories simply by overlapping somehow the two primitives by starting the second gamma command to target 2 when the first gamma command did not yet reach target 1. You end up with something which is smooth, and if you compute the relation between speed and curvature, satisfies the 2/3 power law. Okay, and the same idea, same conclusion can be demonstrated also for 3D scribbles and 3D movement. Okay, what is interesting is, and this is what Vishu started here. You know, he's using a different graphic style than my style, but the same idea. We started from a simple K-net, then you can use it for expanding to a 2-arm, and then it can be applied to the whole body, because from the kinematic point of view, the body is not a kinematic chain, it's a kinematic tree. And the whole body K-net is the representation of a kinematic tree of the whole body. Then, for example, it is interesting that in this way it is possible to perform by manual reaching, simply by using the same gamma command applied to both the two subnetworks that characterize the right and the left arm. It is also possible to use it for representing and implementing multiple concurrent tasks. For example, here is the what is known functional reaching is a test which is used in rehabilitation for verifying how far a subject, a patient, can reach forward without falling down. And the solution for carrying out this kind of functional reaching test can be obtained simply by combining two force fields, one which is that can be labeled focal force field that attracts the end effector, the two hands, to the far-reaching target, and the V1 applied to the center of mass that is pulling backward if the projection of the center of mass on the support base is going to the limit of falling down. And in simulating this, in this case, you only need one gamma command that starts both force fields, the focal and the posterior force fields, and these allow you to generate the overall movement. Here is the time course of the different angles, leg, body, and arm, and generating a velocity, a force, bell-shaped velocity profile of both the hand and the center of mass going forward, but without reaching the maximum position that would generate a falling movement. And then it is also possible to extend the network, the kinematic network, to apply the passive motion paradigm, to include in the representation also external tools, as in this case, for example, external tool is this kind of bimanual kind of little crane to manipulate objects. In this case, what the robot needs is to learn the Jacobian matrices of the tool, and this can be carried out by some kind of initial trial and error and acquisition of information about the kinematic structure. Okay, what about the transition from covert to overt action. That is the transition from what covert actions we call also muscle-less synergies to overt actions that require, of course, muscle activation and are characterized by muscle synergies. The basic concept is that this transition is not straightforward and unique. Overt and covert actions are two faces of the same coin, but one is on one face and the other is on the other face. And the problem is that there is not a unique translation, because that depends on the environmental condition, on the physics, and so once you have a muscle synergies, the control system can generate an overall control strategies by combining different control paradigms according to the physical situations. And basically this combination requires putting together a part of feed-forward control, a part including stiffness control, and a part of a feedback control, which can be continuous or intermittent, together also with haptic control. Let me just briefly show what it is. Suppose that you have this kind of very simple task, which is reaching and lifting a load. In this case, the overall task can be broken down in two phases, the reaching phase and the lifting phase. And you can, I will go quickly through this, but feed-forward control, for example, can be used coming from the PMP, can be used directly for a biasing, for controlling the anti-gravity muscles that implement the static stabilization of the whole body. Then there is haptic control, when at the moment of picking up the load, which allows to evaluate the weight, and thus introducing a bias in the feed-forward control for the lifting up. Then there is a stiffness control for stabilizing the different joints, all the joints except the ankle joint, that for many reasons, which I do not have time to explain now, cannot be stabilized simply by stiffness control, but requires intermittent feedback control, and provides a global gravity stabilization, where the feed-forward gave only the static stabilization. Well, this is just an example. Okay, two more slides. One is to this idea, muscle-less synergies versus muscle synergies. And this is related to the vexing question about what are motor primitives. And so this idea, which primitives are more biological plausible and robotically feasible? Muscle synergies has been proposed by Davella and a colleague, or muscle-less synergies related to the PMP paradigm. Well, the idea is that muscle synergies are only plausible primitives for covert action. For overt action is just the opposite. For overt action, not for covert action, it is not possible to think that people can use muscle synergies for imagined movement. Whereas muscle-less synergies are naturally compatible with the neural simulation theory of Jean, and the proposed equivalence of overt action. In this framework, muscle synergies, which can be, of course, found in the real practice, are the biomechanical consequences of a more abstract and more compact neural simulation model. Finally, this is more or less a very compact representation of a kind of cognitive architecture we have been working on, which separates action control from embodied cognition, but integrates them by means of the body schema, which has the function basically of a kind of a bridge between one part, the overt action, and the other part, which has to do with the covert action. Only in the case of action control, the sensory motor control must take into account the interaction between body and environment. And in the case of the passive motion paradigm, which is here, it will be driven by the gamma command, and a task manager will instantiate the appropriate force field that are necessary for representing a given action on the basis of episodic memory, working memory, and all the kind of knowledge that the organism has been accumulated over the years. This is a short summary of the PMP stories from 2006, when Vishu started his PhD, to today. Okay, so I think that I can stop here, and if there are no questions, I can leave the floor to Vishu.
Yeah, maybe we can take the questions in the end.
I think so. I was about to suggest, because thank you very much for your half of the presentation, and Vishu, whenever you're ready.
Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes, we both see the screen and hear you. I will just ask everyone else to, if possible, mute so we don't have interference. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, good. How much time do I have? 20 minutes?
As you wish. So, I mean,
okay,
also
good.
If it goes a bit over, it's not a problem. I'd say it's a...
Okay. So thanks for inviting me here, and maybe there will be a little bit of repetition of what Professor Morasso already spoke. But yeah, it might be hearing the same thing, but in a different perspective. So let me just start with a simple picture. And if some of us who might have had breakfast this morning might have attempted this challenge. So assume that you wanted to pick this object. So already many of us might start anticipating, because the object is not even visible, but still we are anticipating, oh, it could be a bottle of sauce. So anticipation already begins even in very simple day-to-day tasks. Now assume that I have to reach that object. Okay. So even before I can touch that object, there is a lot of actions which you need to do in that locally available world. You know, maybe reach the bottle of yogurt, which you can see, displace it, or so there are a number of actions which you need to do even before you get to the goal which you want. Okay, so that's why you need simulation, a number of what if experiments. Similarly, if you wanted to pick this bottle, I think it's pepper or something, all of you might have started imagining, how do I approach this object? And if I approach and just pull it up, then you can also imagine that the bottle on top might topple over and fall down, right? So this is just an example of a day-to-day task where imagination of action and real action goes hand in hand. And once again, I mean, the nice thing which I wanted to mention is the configuration of the fridge is constantly changing. So tomorrow, if you open your fridge, it will not be exactly the same. So pre-programmed solutions do not work. Okay, that's why you need to simulate and also generate actions at the same time. So yeah, I mean, we wanted to propose this model for both acting and predicting the feasibility consequence of potential actions of oneself and another. So that's all I had to say. So we can even stop my talk here. But since we have to kill 20 minutes, I'll just speak a little bit more on the more recent work I've been doing. But yeah, this picture kind of gives you the summary of what we want to do. And like Professor Morasso already mentioned, I also do not buy the hype of AI. And we are still far away from having robots which can do such kind of even simple or seemingly very complex tasks. So yeah, but just like the fridge example, the real world is full of such problems. And from understanding others' actions or learning from mistakes, and also picking strawberries, which is something which I've started working on since I joined Essex. And we don't want to pick the low-hanging ones. We want to pick the complex ones. That's where a system like PMP, which allows you to simulate and generate action, is very helpful. Today I just wanted to speak about three things. More on how these networks are applied to a range of robots. More on some of the work which we initially started with iCog, I mean, has a lot of industrial applications. And then I just want to touch upon simulation of the body schema and its relation to causal relations, which allows you to perform more complex what if experiments, okay, for goal-directed reasoning. And finally, I mean, the link between PMP and episodic memory, which is a different body of work, and where we are now. So that's all. I just wanted to touch upon three different things. Yeah, and sorry for the terrible font. This is a new font which I've started using since I started teaching, and in Essex it's called as the Vishu font. Yeah, so once again, it's had a very rich history from 1979 and a lot of clever people, a number of really nice articles. So yeah, so I just wanted to quickly touch upon how do we compose these networks in robots. Okay, so as you can see in the slide, you can use it for coordination of a single arm, like picking of a strawberry, the whole upper body with a tool, or even complex actions like driving a car. But the interesting thing is the underlying principles are the same. So if you just consider a single arm, then there are two things which we need to understand. One is the motor space. So there are two motor spaces. One is the hand space and the joints. Okay, and the two motor spaces are represented by displacement, which is the position of the hand, and the force. Similarly, in the joint space, you represent it by joint velocity and joint force. And very similar to electrical circuits, you can ground the system, you can ground the body. Like if I'm driving a car, I'm grounding the waste. And that's where all the motion propagates through the network. So the first two things when we compose these kind of networks for any robot, it can be a single arm, it can be a whole body, to both generate and simulate actions, there are a small set of principles. There is a motor space, there is grounding, and there are only two kinds of connections. One is the vertical, which is the relationship between displacement and force, which is the elastic component. And there is a horizontal connection, which is a geometric relationship. Geometric relationship between one motor space to another. So one thing which we should observe is all the transformations are well posed. So for example, if I know the joint angles of the arm, I can uniquely determine the position of the hand, but not the other way around. So all the connections in these networks are well posed. So there is no inversion or inverse kinematics. And this solves the degrees of freedom problem in a very different way. And goal is just like a disturbance to the system, you know. So one simple way to understand it is when x is equal to xg, then the energy in the system is 0. So all that the system is trying to do is it's trying to self-organize itself till the time it reaches the goal. Okay, that's where the relationship between active inference comes, that the system tries to minimize the prediction error. Okay, and the goal can act in any node. So it's just shown by this simple video. So as soon as you switch on the goal, the system self-organizes and tries to reach that strawberry. Okay, in this case it's the strawberry, but it can be applied to any kind of network. And the same structure can be repeated to incorporate the whole body. So for example, as I told you, this is just for a single arm. But if you want to combine it with the whole upper body, like the two hands and the waist, which is 17 degrees of freedom of iCog, it's achieving this without any inverse kinematics or any kind of complicated algorithms. Okay, and this is very interesting if you look at the farm. While there are commercial solutions for strawberry picking, couple of them, most of them are single-handed. But if you look at human fruit pickers, this is what they do. They always use two hands, and it's so amazing how the two hands are coordinated in space and time. And I believe that networks like PMP can probably come closer to actually mimicking what the human do, and probably do a better job in these kind of really complex environments. And it can also be extended to use tools. So this was just an example of how to use tools. So what the body schema network provides is something which is configured based on the goal. So you can connect different parts of the body. You can add tools. You can give timing signals. So it allows you to perform a range of complex movements, not only execute them, but also imagine that if I do this, and these networks can then be triggered in a number of circumstances based on the task at hand. And what we believe is that task-specific and runtime synthesis of such networks of body, tools, and other bodies is a core element of action generation or imagination. So these are all like ingredients. If I want to cook something today, I just pull out the correct ingredients, combine them, and I achieve the goal. So it's all distributed in that sense. So I just wanted to quickly speak about what we are doing in the agri-tech side. So yeah, it's a challenging sector, commercially very relevant, but there are also big challenges. I mean, it's a big mess, and it's good for science if there is a lot of mess. So there are big problems of labor availability. There is economics. And more recently, during the COVID time, even in UK, the government launched this Pick for Britain, where they were encouraging people who were furloughed, like the airline industry and many other industries, to go back to farm and pick the rotting fruits. So because, I mean, still we don't have robots which can do this kind of tasks in a way that is commercially viable. But the more interesting thing which is nice is, so this is a farm which I work with, and it's the country's first vertical growing system. So they have doubled the production in the same area. But what if there are no pickers to pick these fruits? They are just going to rot in the field. So it's a big industrial challenge at the moment. So kind of, I mean, since I didn't have access to iCog, I mean, so we designed, partially assembled a really nice robotic platform. It's called as the Beast, and which we are actually using for strawberry picking. And PMP and Kinematic Networks are now being applied to the Beast, which I just want to show. But so obviously, I mean, if you have to detect strawberries, I mean, we are not allowed to touch the fruit because it's a perishable fruit. So perception action loop, I mean, we use deep learning and to predict where the stem is, and especially in agri-tech and food processing, I mean, even products of the same type, there is a large variation in color, shape, texture, and so on. And one nice thing which we are doing, I mean, mainly COVID forced us to do this. That's because we couldn't hit the farm, and we lost the whole strawberry season this year from March to September. So we started learning from fake data. So the idea is something like this. Just take a background, take a fruit, create some fake occlusions, and then generate a number of fake data like this example below, and then you train a network, and then this is what you get when you trial the system on the field to recognize strawberries in a vertical growing complex environment. And once again, that's why you need to simulate, not just to pick the low hanging fruits, but the more complex ones. This is how it looks. And maybe what if I use my left hand with a stick and slowly try to move the leaves, and I can find a strawberry which is ripe enough and I can pick with my right hand. Human fruit pickers do this very often, and they also do this to remove the rotten strawberries. And some of these reasoning can be done geometrically from the point cloud, but some of this you actually have to simulate and plan. So that's why we need to simulate, and these kind of networks can be learned. So if I'm just learning the internal model of the body, then you can learn it using babbling movements. So it generates data, which is the intrinsic space, which is the body joints, and the extrinsic space, which can be the hand or the tool. And you can train a neural network, which then computes the Jacobians. But this loop is interesting because if you have a new robot which is coming out of the box, you just have to repeat these steps, and rest of the software is completely configurable. So all that you have to change is the weight matrix. If I have a new robot, I just train the body and replace the weight files, and rest all of the software is completely configurable. If we are trying to learn to use tools, then the data can also be generated through a combination of imitation and exploration. And we've done this with iCog and also some work here. And this is just a quick example of some trials as soon as this robot came out of the box. And this is very interesting because it was unreachable. The goal is unreachable. So you can then connect it with a coupled tool and then solve a goal which is not directly realizable. And there are a lot of examples from animal behavior where if given a number of tools, animals can choose the right tool, which is suitable to solve the goal. So they don't do it by trial and error. Okay, so there is some evidence that it's due to goal-directed simulation. Okay, so these kind of networks make such kind of tasks possible. Again, there is a side effect of this kind of training because when we do babbling movements, you also represent space. So you can also learn the peripersonal space. So in addition to the model of the body, you can also get a representation of your own peripersonal space and how it can be expanded if you have tools coupled to your body. So this is just one more neural network, which is a growing self-organizing map. And it gives a representation of the space in front of the robot. And this then allows you to do a lot of spatial planning. So model of the body and model of the space. And this is just with our bimanual agricultural robot. And this is some work which we did in Darwin, which was a project when I was working at IIT. So in this case, what is happening is because of when the user disturbed the environment, the goal was not directly doable. So the second robot inferred that if it could generate an action of pushing, which was previously learned, then the object could go into the peripersonal space of the second robot, and it could then solve the goal. So these are all like what if experiments. If something happens in the world, what should I do and how can I change the world to make it more conducive to realize the goal at hand? And this is something which is very interesting because again, thanks to the coronavirus, food production is a big problem. And I just want to tell you what it is. So the average distance between two humans in a sandwich making production line is 50 centimeters. And 12 human beings assemble 30 sandwiches in 1 minute. So obviously it's all shut down or tremendously affected. So we are just starting a new project which kind of uses these kind of principles, internal model of the body which is learned with the model of space to collaboratively assemble sandwiches instead of two humans. It could be a human and a robot. And again, there are challenges in the picking side also, which is identification of these kind of deformable objects and manipulating them, which is okay. This is just some example of the use of PMP for, I mean, packaging of strawberries. But then we also used it for bimanual coordination. And in this case, we are using a kind of a 3D printed gripper cutter to cut the strawberry stem after localizing it. But it can be used for a number of other things like searching for hidden berries, removing weeds. We're also looking at packaging. I mean, it's been, I mean, the results have been so far very positive. There is another project which I'm doing is a kind of an insertion task, peg in hole insertion task, which people have been doing since I don't know 80s. But in this case, everything is in water, so it's a completely unstructured environment, you know. So everything is floating in water, and you need to insert. Even I couldn't do it. I tried to do this task myself, and I couldn't do it. So I mean, imagine getting a robot to do some kind of task like this, and it requires closed loop feedback. And we are just starting a new project funded by the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, which kind of looks at bringing versatility into harvesting and agricultural robotics, specifically in the context of manipulation, reaching, grasping, using tools. There are a number of things which, I mean, and what PMP brings in here is configurability, which is, and dexterity, which is very interesting for me. And so recently we launched this interdisciplinary facility called as EPIC, or the Essex Plant Innovation Center, which kind of brings in people from computer science, the plant biologists, people from data analytics, and the farming community. And it's been, I mean, it's been very positive, the reception from the growers in this region. Just before I finish, I mean, as I mentioned previously, PMP can be used for just goal-directed motion. So in this case, the goal is a fixed point attractor, but you can also have moving point attractors. Moving point attractor means the goal keeps changing with time, and this can easily be done by changing the stiffness and the timing. So if I change the stiffness and the timing, you can generate a range of trajectories. So here you have 3 points, CP1, CP2, and you can generate a range of complex spatiotemporal trajectories in 2D and 3D. And these can then attract the body. Okay, so this is an example way back in 2011-12 where, I mean, the attractor is the trajectory and the arm is then used to produce the movements. And then you can exploit compositionality. So if I learn to draw a C, then I can use it to draw S and even a complex shape. So this is things which we did way back, where the goal was not a fixed point attractor, but was a moving point attractor. And the timing signal then controls the synergy formation. But then, I mean, obviously, I mean, I just want to illustrate the industrial side of it. So someone from the, I mean, it's a big company, and can you make a robot draw a circle? Oh yeah, we did this like 10 years back. Can you make a robot draw a circle with a knife or a cutting tool? Oh yes, I think we can extend the system with the kinematics and learn the tool Jacobian or whatever and expand the model. Now comes the tricky part. Can you draw a circle with a knife or a cutting tool on an animal carcass? That's where it becomes more complex, you know, as Professor Morasso said. How do you integrate? So vegetarians can close their eyes, but yeah. So how do you integrate the system with haptics, feed-forward control, inclusion of a dynamic processor? So this is some work which we are doing to expand the PMP framework, and these are deformable material, and cutting is an art. I mean, if you watch MasterChef Italia, I mean, how the I mean, I don't know who it was, Carlo Cracco or someone. He can finish a chicken in 2 minutes. I mean, it's an art which we are, I mean, it's very tricky. So the message over here is that complex spatiotemporal trajectories can be generated using moving point attractors. So it's just before I finish, I mean, so it's a configurable internal representation of the body, and based on the goal, the necessary ingredients for action, generation, or simulation can be brought in. But one thing which we need to think, when repeatedly used, some of these networks can then be stored into memory and associated with verbs. Okay, so if I'm doing the same thing again and again, I mean, I can just store it and connect it with a word, which can then abstract all the complexity. So all the details are encapsulated. So that's where, I mean, this little vocabulary comes in. Like there are not many actually. If you think, we do a lot of similar things, but in a very, very different ways, based on the nature of the environment we are interacting in. Okay. And when combined with objects, you can have a little proto language which can be used to learn or compose more complex behaviors. And this is very interesting because that's where the action and language start bootstrapping each other. And if you look at children also, I mean, when they learn to speak, that's also the time they are doing complex sequences of action while playing. And this association between action and language can take the configurability provided by the PMP framework to a different level. Okay, where you can connect these kind of things to create little vocabularies which can be used to compose more complex behaviors with all the complexity encapsulated inside, like assemble a tower or make a vegan sandwich, assemble a fuse box. So that's where the relationship between PMP and episodic memory comes, where that there is a detailed simulation at the level of action, but then there is also a more abstract simulation. Like what is the consequence of actions on objects? What is the reward I can get? So these are two different simulations at different time scales. So episodic memory is a completely different body of work, but what it does is it remembers past experiences based on multimodal cues. So if the robot sees a mushroom or hears the word mushroom, then it can remember its past experiences. Like, I tried to build a tower and it didn't work. Okay, so what the episodic memory does is it tries to remember past experiences based on the cues in the world. So see a mushroom, see an object, remember what I have done with it. And similarly, if the robot sees a bread or a tomato, then it can generate a partial cue, and then it can recall the memory of assembling a vegan sandwich. And this is something we did in Darwin. So using proto language, okay, so you can use proto language to teach it steps, and then you can use it to perform complex behaviors. But partial cues can also be generated from observing someone else's actions. Okay, so you can configure the internal model of the body and then simulate what is the goal of the other person and how do I collaborate with him. And more recently, I mean, Penny, who is also here, has been also trying to trigger episodic memory based on face and users. So this is just an example. Sorry, Penny. Yeah, where the robot is recognizing her, and now she's taking a different medicine. So as soon as the robot sees her, it remembers what are its interactions with her, and then when she shows it some medicine, then it temporarily integrates it, and then infers that it's not the thing which she should be doing. So these are things which, I mean, Penny has been working on in the social side with collaboration with hospitals and NHS. So we are gradually moving beyond objects, words, looking at people for user-centric assistance. But one thing which we need to think is remembering the past also simulates the future. So you can learn a lot of things, and then you can use this for goal-oriented behavior. So multiple memories can be combined to generate novel behaviors. It's very similar to traveling in time, from the past to present and the future and connecting the dots. But maybe, I mean, in the future, we can have a talk on episodic memory. It's a very interesting piece of work, which started when I was at IIT, and I still think it has a very, very huge potential. So That's the schematic which Professor Morasso presented, and I just want to say tell you where we are at the moment. So it's kind of an architecture which has been developing from 10 plus years, many contributors. So we have vision, we do a lot of work on vision. We do, I mean, with Pepper, we have also the possibility of user interacting with the tablet. Speech, we are just starting, action, perception, and all these things are giving goals. Okay, and then we have a central executive module. It's called as the observer. Our observer is the observer of the internal states of the body or the self, and it has a number of neural networks which then connect to the episodic memory system, and which kind of remembers, predicts, connects memories, produces a plan, and then we have a plan execution or a monitoring system, working memory. And then comes the action generation, which is the body schema, the PMP, and the primitive behaviors, which can be connected with words. And with Pepper, we've also been working on navigation because it's an important feature for hospitals. And you have a multimodal output layer, so it can do simple things like picking strawberries, human-aware motion planning, which is what you see in the little schematic below, which is in a 3-bedroom house where multiple agents are moving, tablet interface, and speech. So, and one thing which which I wanted to mention is it's a kind of a configurable framework. You can take parts of it and apply it for different applications, but as an integrated framework, it also does a lot of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Okay, and we should not think of this as a sequential thing. It's a very asynchronous and event-driven architecture. So the system is reacting to events which happens. Okay, and Francesco actually helped me a lot in the initial design of the system. And yeah, I mean it's still in development. So there are a number of these modules need better implementation, extension in computational framework. So just before I end, I mean, I just wanted to say, end with the story of Betty. So Betty had this problem of fetching her dinner basket, which was inside a vertical tube, and there was a wire hanging over here. And this is what she did. Okay. And it created a lot of excitement in the scientific community when you saw a little crow doing such an intelligent behavior. But imagine what if Betty was a robot instead? What were the problems we would solve? So we need to solve perception beyond labeling or understanding the scene. What can I do with the objects in my world? Which is something the episodic memory can help with. Inference, the goal is not achievable. I cannot reach that basket with my beak. This is where the body schema simulation can provide this information. Memory, I played with the twig or wires 1 year back. Again, episodic memory. Fine manipulation, creating a hook-like tool and using it as an extension to the body, which is something the PMP networks are capable of doing. Some knowledge of cause-effect relation, that if I pull the basket with a hook-like tool, then the food can come up. And then integration, which is the magic glue, which puts all of these, and all these areas still need work. So forget about even infants. I mean, things like what Betty did to get her dinner still needs work in computational modeling, software integration, cognitive architecture. So yeah, I mean, generating dexterous actions and imagining consequences of potential actions are two sides of the same coin. It's very much like what background and the foreground, and it acts as a middleware. So it kind of connects studies from neuroscience, mirror neurons, motor imagery, developmental robotics, and then there are a lot of tough industrial problems in agriculture, food processing, textile, even extreme environments. So we are a part of the National Center for Nuclear Robotics, where we are handling nuclear waste material. And it kind of connects a number of topics, which is very interesting. And so yeah, I mean, we have like 3 different labs, so please welcome to visit Essex. And if you need any of the software, get in touch with me. That's my email address. And this is the short summary of PMP, and I think I will end here.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vishu, and thank you both for a very, very lovely talk. I think that the scope of the research covered here, going back to the 80s to all the things that are done now, was really incredible. I would say that now we can open the floor to questions. So
Am I
if you
still sharing the screen? Am I still sharing?
yes,
So how do I?
if you click there, perfect.
Okay, I'm gone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me just see. Okay, so essentially, if you have questions, you can go ahead and unmute yourselves or use the raise hand button and I can unmute you as you wish. While we're waiting for the participants to figure out the questions, I have a couple. So as you've wished, they both, oh, just a sec. So, okay, we have just a positive message from Luciana Fadiga. So both of my questions actually pertain to the cognitive architecture that you illustrated, and more precisely for the covert actions part. I can aim them one-on-one at Vishu and Pietro, so you can answer separately. Vishu, I would like to ask regarding the PMP, like you mentioned, very big goal of it is actually to simulate and generate actions that then allow you to kind of plan ahead. But if I understood correctly, you mentioned that inverse kinematics are absolutely not a part of it.
Yes.
Can you, I mean, if you would like to clarify a bit on why inverse kinematics were not chosen as something for simulating an action, considering that the whole, let's say, base principle of inverse kinematics is seeing a goal and then calculating how to reach it?
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's just computational simplicity to begin with. So multiplying a matrix with a number is much easier than inverting a matrix. So it's computationally simple. It can then be combined with for any, it's agnostic to any degree of freedom. So it's agnostic to redundancy. So one of the reasons is computational simplicity. If you want to coordinate a 52 degrees of freedom robot, and all the computations are well posed in nature in this kind of a network. So that's why we are following this kind of principle. And maybe Professor Morasso might want to add something on this.
Absolutely.
Why no inverse kinematics?
Yes, because inverse kinematics is a narrow way to look at the fact that when you have a target, you have a goal, you have to find a way to distribute the goal to the different muscles, actuators, whatever it is. But in fact, there is never in practical actions in real life. It is never only one goal. In the example, for example, of functional reaching, there are always multiple goals. One goal is to have the hand reach something. The other is to be sure that your stability is acquired. The other, there are other, for example, in pure inverse kinematics, it is very difficult to be sure that while you are computing, you are not going against the range limits of different joints or other constraints. So this idea of having one framework that encapsulates many different goals or constraints and synchronize them with the same tempos, like the Go command, is at the basis of the PMP, to integrate them in the same network. So, in a sense, is a much more general way to carry out inverse kinematics at the whole body level.
Absolutely, and I think it takes into account what we as biological agents don't think of. So as you mentioned, maybe our conscious opinion is done in the inverse kinematics way of seeing a goal and wanting to reach it, but everything else that keeps the body's center of mass balanced, that everything else that happens in the background, we don't think about that. Whereas for very obvious reasons, for artificial agents, this has to be calculated. So.
But and there is also an inversion. When you think that of doing one action, one could think that actually the arm or the body is pushing the arm and the body to reach the goal. Whereas from this point of view, is the goal which is pulling.
Pulling, yeah.
Like the puppeteer is pulling the body to reach the action. It's just seems the same, but it's just the opposite.
Absolutely. Okay. If there are no questions, I can also go with the second one, but maybe it's nice also if someone from the audience wants to ask.
Well, just a general question. Thanks for the presentation, both to Piero and Vishu. Very interesting and long story. I mean, I was wondering, you know, in this schema, how this general idea, how does the developmental approach fits in terms of, you know, providing the system increasingly more sophisticated sensory input or more sophisticated motor abilities. Does this fits into the model you presented, and how?
So yeah, I mean, so the first work when we started was to learn the model of the body using babbling movements. Then we started introducing a range of playing things like building the tallest tower, learning to push, which then expands the model of the body with gradual interactions. And one thing which I mean I have tried to follow is a constrained exploration. So you don't give the system too many things to learn, even if it was a robot. Start with stacking two towers, learn to draw a line or a C, and then gradually expand. So it's always introducing new things. So internal model of the body, then space, then causal relations, then combining it with episodic memory. So it's a gradual cumulative curve of the robot. The only thing which still we have not been successful is the lifelong learning, because all these experiments are separate. While the episodic memory connects it, that's the same for even humans, because I learned something today, maybe I learn something else tomorrow, but the episodic memory kind of binds everything together. And some of the work on skill learning then also comes from the teacher, like the imitation experiments or proto language, which is for the how do you assemble a vegan sandwich. So you can compose little words, actions on objects, and tell the robot. But this combination of exploration, imitation, and language is still, I mean, we haven't done anything on that. So it's always, I mean, when I think of experiments, I usually look at infants, and even my office has a number of toys. So yeah,
the role of the teacher is also important here.
The role of the teacher, yes, I mean, it directly cut short the exploration time, and I fundamentally believe that teacher plays a much more role. You can always have one-shot learning. I've been a big supporter of one-shot learning, or human-like learning, in contrast to millions and millions of data, and we learn very quickly, you know, at least so that's something which, I mean, even in the community, it needs to be injected more. That, I mean, there is no need to make the system more complex just for the sake of it. Okay, if you can do it in a simple way, just do it.
I agree with you, Vishu. Thank you.
And of course, this is related to the issue of imitation, you know, because when you have a teacher, the teacher shows you, you extract the basic elements, and the teacher, but what is important is that the interaction between a teacher and the learner is something that goes with different time scales, you know, not necessarily a very continuous time, like interacting at each element of, but only providing some feedback at a crucial element. This is where good teachers are, to leave freedom to make errors, and then to give a feedback when it is very crucial, let's say.
Even for human students, not just robots, but even for human students, this is very crucial, as I'm learning at Essex.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions from the audience? I fear we may be going into the unfortunate lunchtime period, so maybe people are... I can have just one very quick one to wrap things up if nobody else wants to ask, which is, I wanted to ask a bit more about the time-based generator in your schema, because if I understood, that's the one from where the gamma command is generated, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the gamma command is interacting with the PMP to kind of guide the deadlines, but in your architecture, it's a standalone, so nothing enters, let's say, in the time-based generator. So how are the deadlines, let's say, for generating the force fields generated? What would be the guiding point for giving a gamma deadline?
Well, the effect that you wanted to achieve a deadline, because the deadline many times is enforced from the outside. It's like when you have to, there is a deadline for a grant a grant presentation. Okay, so you know that by April 30. You have to present all the details of your grant, and you start now, and you start now very slowly, you know, very slowly. You are reading something, writing something, correcting, and things like that. But when you approach the deadline, the rate of correcting, doing something will go to infinity, let's say. And this is the main difference between a metronome that gives you some kind of ta-ta-ta independent of, to the fact that this deadline can be also introduced from the outside. The outside says you must reach that at that time, or in some sport you must reach the ball because your vision told you that the ball will reach you at that time, you know, for some expectation. So this kind of a deadline is different from some, is not something continuous. It's something that sharp must be done at the time. Yes. And that allows you to synchronize different sub-actions and the sub-part and part of your activity, let's say.
Okay, so in effect, even though between the overt and covert actions, the only link shown in your architecture is the one via the body schema, there is some implicit link also connecting, let's say, the environment to the time-based generator.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
yes, because you have seen that the two parts of the general schematic architecture are separated, but they communicate.
Yes.
Communicate not in real time, but providing also events that suggest to the cognitive part to set up deadline or sub goals that are crucial for life or survival or defeat, let's say.
Yeah, it's a very nice point that the communication is not just the real-time communication of, okay, I have an action planned, now I'm acting in the overt actions, but it's also, okay, I'm receiving information, this will help me generate some deadlines later on, this will help me plan. Very nice.
It can also be connected to words like fast. If the mom tells the baby walk faster, the baby immediately within seconds will start increasing the speed, you know. So it can be connected to words which then control the timing signals. Yeah.
Yeah, this I think is an important feature. Yeah, because it is implicitly it is a way to learn new things from all the experiences.
And I definitely agree that there is a whole other talk for episodic memory that's
that
should happen.
I take that as a promise, Vishu.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Me too. I mean, I take that as a promise because it's a different body of work, but I'm really passionate about it. And
Okay.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, anytime.
Yeah.
Okay.
In
We have
2021, that we hope will be a little bit better than 2020.
Yes, and we could do it as a physical talk and not like this in this team.
Yes, we want. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we have a question from Carlo Mazzola. Carlo, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, of
Yes.
course.
Okay. Yes, I was wondering if you have the occasion to point out the role of body schema, not only for perception of environment without an explicit goal. If body schema can help to perceive the environment even if the agent doesn't have an explicit goal.
I didn't think about that. Vishu, did you? We were more focused on action, let's say, than on the perception.
Because I studied philosophy, and actually in phenomenology, body schema are there are phenomenologists that think about body schema before perception. So just to perceive the environment. So I perceive something because it is connected to me, to my body. So it is very interesting what you have done. Also with the image of the fridge, I was thinking even if I don't have a goal, maybe I perceive the things that are in the fridge with my body schema. So maybe body schema can help also in a pure perception, let's say, because pure perception, it's true that isn't. I don't think that perception for agents is not connected with goals, but maybe with implicit goals, so covert goals, not always overt goals.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I haven't thought about it, but I mean, maybe dreaming. I mean, I don't know. I mean, when we dream, we see ourselves doing things which are completely irrelevant. But one thing which it connects is to generate. I believe that this kind of dreaming and simulation generates fake data, which then can be used to train the network. Very similar to what I'm doing with strawberries. Everything is fake, but then it when applied in the real world, it has some value or utility. So yeah, I mean, I mean, at some point, body schema is related to the sense of self. In some point, I mean, but yeah, I mean, it's a bit far away. We've been more involved in the functional aspect of it, but obviously, from the viewpoint of cognition, yeah, it's something which we haven't thought so much about.
Well, in any case, embodied cognition implicitly assumes that the structure of a body is a filter for doing as well as for perceiving, and is really multifaceted. And in any case, we, as Vishu was saying before, we are aiming at iCog. We aim to put together many bricks that build up maybe initially a small wall before doing a skyscraper, let's say.
Yeah.
And we shall see which are the basic bricks to put together. But we need quite a lot of them. Consider that at the old times, they could build huge buildings using just the standard Roman flat bricks, putting them together in different shapes.
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
Okay, thank you also for the very, very nice discussion. I think probably we can wrap up the event if Professor Sandini wants to say anything to close it off?
No, I mean, it is. I mean, it was a pleasure to have both Piero and Vishu at the same time talking about a project they have been developing for many years, and that is certainly very important in the framework of these, iCog initiative we are working on. So this is just the beginning. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we hope to see you soon in a next event for episodic memory. And take care.
Excellent.
Be well.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye.